material. What's he saying?
Yeah,
I'm confused.
I was wondering what the implication is.
A lot of hot air. All right, so
It's kind of warm.
what was the most difficult, or at least one of the most difficult moves you had to make?
Getting out of this chair.
Get that out of the way, right?
A triple axle.
Do I hear a bowel movement? Anybody?
That was it.
That was Charlie.
Hey, it's a men's group. It's a men's group. If that's the direction you guys want to go, you are my elder.
in the back, so.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
It wasn't me that went there. Just let the record show. Anyone else? Yeah.
Coming to this church, not because of this church, but I had been where I was for 30 years, so it was a big move. I was not prepared to make, but God kind of helped me along by way of my wife.
Mhm.
So,
30
yeah,
years.
It was rough.
That's some roots there. 30 years.
It was rough.
It qualifies as some roots, I'd say. Anyone else? Difficult move. Yeah.
After my wife passed away, it was very difficult for me to go out with another lady.
So transition, that kind of transition was very sure.
Try that when you're 62 years old.
Hope I don't have to, but I hear you. I
I
hear
hope you
you.
don't have to also.
Thank you. Anyone else? Difficult move for you to make? Transition or location? Your moves are smooth sailing, pretty easy going. That's good. Love it when that happens. Anyone else? All right. Well, I gave you a chance to talk, so maybe your most difficult move is yet to come. I don't know. For me, growing up, Dad reminded me of this just yesterday, actually, because growing up, whenever he took a different job at another church, my family moved. You know, that's kind of how it was, at least from what I remember. So the one that stood out to me the most was probably because I was the oldest at the time. I was 12 when we moved here to Merritt Island. So same boat as you. Coming here, for me, it was, you know, my big chunk of my life was at the previous church, but we made a move or two before that. So, but I do remember that being more of a, I think it was more memorable because of my years of, I don't remember, I want to say from ages 6 to 12, somewhere 7 to 12, somewhere in there. I spent in the Orlando area with Southside Christian Church, which was a previous church before that. And so my friends and stuff were there. And being a homeschool kid, you know, you just kind of, that's who you hang out with, you know? So that's what I knew. And then we came over here and I thought, what? I still have memories of the first day being here. And I have a number of memories. There was this lady up front singing for music. I think she was singing a special music. It was some lady named Sarah Da Silva. And she broke down and cried in the middle of her song. And it was, I didn't remember why, but I was just thinking, like, are you that sad to be here? Like, it just stinks to be in church that bad that you're crying in the middle of your special music. So I know there have been a number of history and I don't know details, but things have happened up to that point. And so I just remember thinking, like, I don't want to be here. This looks awful. I hope Dad's not moving here or something. And guess what, you know.
Guess what?
But ended up being one of the best things for me, for sure, to get around a different group of people that were different. Made me have to figure out, like, wow, am I really a Christian because I want to be a Christian, or is it because my friends are all Christians? And that's just kind of the way it is. So we go through these kind of things, and I'm sure you guys will can attest to that, and you're aware of it, and it will continue to happen, unfortunately, later on in life. But it would be hard for us to liken any difficult move that we've had to the move that we are talking about through the prophet Jeremiah. It'd be very hard to liken any hard experience we had, any hard move we had, to the idea of leaving the promised land, leaving the holy city, and going to Babylon. Babylon, which, by the way, the name Babylon, what does that even sound like? You ever heard of the Tower of Babel? What does that sound like? Babel, Babel. From some of the commentaries I read, they seem to have the idea that, the idea of the Tower of Babel, Babel is just kind of meaningless talk. It's strange tongue, I don't understand it kind of a thing. Well, for the people going there, if you've been in a country that you're not from and you don't speak their language, man, what a scary thing to have a bunch of people talking all around you. They could be talking about you. You have no idea. You're clueless. You don't get it. That's a very uncomfortable situation. And so for them to leave the very presence of God, or so they thought, in this holy city with this beautiful golden temple on a hill, and then to be thrown into this pagan Babel nonsense society where their lives are at stake, and they don't know when they're coming or going or if they're going to live. It's just very, very difficult. And so a lot of people's minds were not ready to go there. And we know that's what Jeremiah is constantly having to hit on over and over again, right? So the last week, what we were looking at was the yoke passage, right? It was Jeremiah chapter 27, and he's talking about the how the people are going to have to put on this yoke and serve the king of Babylon. And I'm thankful to have guys like you here to help keep me in check, to remind me that there's more than just the yoke that they use for oxen and for animals. There's the yoke that humans use too, which for some strange reason, the obvious didn't enter my mind. What a concept. But yeah, Dave Bates was talking about bringing one in, but the thing that they would have over their shoulders, and you could hang buckets from either side or carry very hefty loads, which I didn't do any research on that, but I'd be curious to see what some of you know about this, that some of what humans can carry, a single human can lug around, is impressive. What was that story? I heard a story of a lady that actually ended up dying because she was one of those women that I believe they would place the real heavy loads right on her head. Sometimes they have these head baskets in certain African countries, Haiti and different places like that. And these women could lift a tremendous amount of weight, and they had it up there. Well, my understanding was they took an engine, wasn't it? An engine block, put it on this lady's head. And this lady was walking with an engine block, and she carried it however far she had to carry it. Problem was, on the other side, there weren't people to unload it like there were supposed to be. So she ended up breaking her neck trying to get this thing down. But otherwise, she probably would have been successful. Just what mankind is capable of doing, it's pretty incredible, but at the same time, it's pretty severe. You think, my back's killing me. I had to weed whack my whole yard today, a half acre. And yeah, our backs hurt, but come on, I'm not lugging around an engine on my head, that's for sure. And that's so. But yeah, I don't know how much weight they loaded on these wooden yokes, but I imagine as much as they could. I don't think foreign kings thought very nicely of their slaves. I think they just wanted as much taken away as they could, and they didn't want to make extra trips. So there you go. Throw it on the yoke. So the idea of people having to wear a yoke, come on. I mean, I watch a lot of these Korean shows. A lot of other people, we watch these certain shows too, but when you are in a position of power, you feel invincible, don't you? It's easy to kind of become like untouchable. People puff themselves up in these situations. Well, what if your dad is the president? Well, if your dad's the president, or if your dad is the judge, or if your dad is the one, it's pretty hard to get anything bad to happen to you if dad's looking out for you. It's easy to flaunt that or whatever. Well, if you've been brought up and you were told that your dad is God, and there he is right there, what on earth are you going to do to me? What on earth, So that attitude was very, very inflated their ego. And the idea that some prophet of God, of their father, would come in and say, no, you're going to wear that slave yoke and lug around this heavy load is just outrageous. It's ridiculous to them. And we're going to see how ridiculous it is because there's going to be a false prophet that comes into play. But we'll get to that. So in chapter 27 of the book of Jeremiah, starting in verse 9, but as for you, do not listen to your prophets, Jeremiah says, your diviners, your dreamers, your soothsayers, or your sorcerers who speak to you, saying, you will not serve the king of Babylon. For they, that's all these people, they prophesy a lie to you in order to remove you far from your land. And I will drive you out, and you will perish. But the nation which will bring its neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon and serve him, I will let remain on its land, declares the Lord. And they will till it and dwell in it. So, God through Jeremiah lists a whole bunch of people. A whole bunch of people. It's this theme of emphasis by enumeration. We've heard that before. If you really want to emphasize something, you don't just say it, you say it, you say it again, you say it again, you say it again in a different way. Right? If you want to hurt Randall, you don't just say, Randall, I hope you get hurt. You say, Randall, I hope you break your left pinky. Then I hope you trip over and you bust your nose open. Then as you get up, somebody kicks you in the face. And you just keep enumerating all these different ways. Well, time and time again, Jeremiah said, don't listen to your false prophets. Don't listen to them. They're prophesying lies. Well, now he says, not only prophets, but what about this other list? I don't care if they're a prophet, a diviner, a dreamer, a soothsayer, a sorcerer, whatever, any kind of So what is this list? Well, prophets, we know those guys, right? Prophets were people who were they were spokesmen. They were people who would speak for God. Diviners would be people who interpreted omens or any weird phenomena that there is. We know kind of what an omen is, right? Sometimes anything mysterious happens and we're like, oh, it's an omen. It's just bizarre. It's weird, Whether it be something in the sky or your neck hairs standing up, it's just some sort of an omen. Well, they would interpret that. Dreamers would be people who would interpret dreams. Soothsayers that's sort of like diviners, but we don't know. There's a subtle difference probably. Not sure what it is. Sorcerers would be people who practice an unknown form of magic. So you just go right on down the list. Some of these names, I believe it's Deuteronomy 18 that lists these categories. A lot of these things are things that God says, no, absolutely not. I forbid these things. But they were ways of determining knowledge that you didn't already know. They're ways of accessing either future knowledge or any kind of knowledge that you were not supposed to have and getting it. And he runs through the gauntlet of every major category that they would think of at that time. And he says, I don't care where you are getting it from. If it says this, do not listen to it because it's wrong. It is wrong. He's enumerating, he's emphasizing as much as he possibly could that you can't listen to any message that speaks contrary to what I'm telling you. If they say you're not going to serve Babylon, they are wrong. I don't care who they are. I don't care what their credentials are. I don't care how godly or ungodly they are. They're just plain wrong. So this is every category of advisor. In verse 10, it talks about their purpose. It says they prophesy a lie to you to remove you far from the land. And you got to wonder, really? Is that what they were attempting to do? Was that their goal? Do you think these people got together, the prophets of Judah got together and masterminded themselves an idea that says, you know what? We love our power so much that we want the people to suffer at the hands of God's wrath. So we're going to prophesy a lie to them. Do you think they intentionally prophesied a lie to them?
No.
Don't think so? It says that they were prophesying a lie with the it says in order to remove you far from the land.
Yeah, I guess they took that to mean that was the outcome God was telling them was going to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
I assume that they had their motive for the lying, the so-called prophesying, was to gain favor.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm in agreement with what you're saying. I think that's an important point to be made. It seems unlikely that these people deliberately wanted their people to suffer. Their people being around probably made them feel special themselves. I doubt that in their own minds they knowingly wanted them to go into this kind of exile or this kind of suffering. They didn't want to drive them out of the land, I don't think. But the results of what they are actually saying would lead to the very thing they didn't want, them being drawn out of the land. So the very fact that they're saying what they're saying means that this is the result that's going to happen. So I really think that whether they realized it or not, that was their ultimate objective. They were in line with that path, even though they may not have wanted it themselves. They may not have understood the logical outcome of their own actions. Which, man, gotta remind myself of that constantly. So many times I get frustrated with people because in my mind it's clear as day. You're doing this, this, and this, and it leads to this path. You see the end and you know exactly where it goes, and you're frustrated with people. Why are you deliberately doing that? But we gotta stop and realize that a lot of people never look to the end. Like they just don't. For whatever reason, they're blinded to it. They're not trying. They don't think that way. They just think about the here and now and what they're doing, and it feels right, and they go with it, and they're not looking to the end. Don't just assume that people logically get the outcome of their actions. Don't just assume that, right? You and I, go ahead, yeah.
Another example of that would have been Pharaoh letting the Israelites go.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed to me that he could see, I mean, with the plagues coming down the pike, one right behind the other, like, wait a minute, where's that? I don't understand. What am I supposed to do? Let my people go.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. Oh, that's something. I don't want to overstate the point, but yeah, I agree. I don't just assume that people understand the consequences of their actions, yet they need to be taught that. I was thinking kind of along with, you know, the example of Pharaoh. A separate example would be just the very common scales theology that everyone who's not even a Christian seems to adopt. The idea that make sure you do a little more good than bad and you're good with God. You know, if there is a God, you'll be good with him. Just don't live a terrible life. Don't kill anyone. You know, do more good things than bad. You kind of tip the scales and you're good to go. Kind of this mental system that we have. Well, you and I know that that's a completely illegitimate view of sin. Sin is nothing like, you know, sin would be much better categorized as a cancer or a poison or something where just one little drop of it infects the entire person, you know. But people have this view and then they just trace it to the end and they think, oh, I'm going to be fine. You have to let them know, no, you have sin. And what that is a lot more like something else, and it leads to a totally different place. But you don't count on people just understanding that you do bad things. You know, you're a sinner. We're all sinners. I think a lot of people know they're sinners, but they're not worried about it because they're convinced that they're a little bit better than they are bad, and they're going to make it regardless of the fact that they're sinners, you know? That's just kind of the way they think. So it's not enough to tell someone, in my opinion, that they're a sinner. They need to understand you are a sinner, but do you know what that means? That means you're helpless. You're lost. You are completely doomed. That's what it means. Unless someone perfect comes in to save you. So things like that. These people makes me wonder too, and the Bible hints at this over and over again. What about Satan's forces here? When it says these people prophesy a lie in order to get you to leave your land, maybe it's not those people wanting them to go, but maybe it's the enemy, maybe it's the forces of evil working through these people because they want them kicked out of their land. They want God's people to suffer and to look shameful, to, you know, humiliate God. And so they're working through these people. Another possibility that I don't think we should ever rule out, especially given what the New Testament tells us and toward the end of Ephesians about how serious our struggle is and how it's not against flesh and blood, you know. So something to take into consideration. And whoever wants to save his life, in the 11th verse, kind of reminds me of the words of Jesus. If you want to save your life, what do you have to do? You gotta lose it. Whoever wants to save his life will lose it. Same idea of what Jesus said in this particular situation. If you want to save your life, you're going to have to lose it. You guys have gone too far. But the true prophet of God is saying it's the only way. Submit to the yoke. Submit to this yoke. I spoke words like all of these to Zedekiah, king of Judah, saying, bring your necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon and serve him, and his people and live. Why will you die, you and your people, by the sword, famine, and pestilence, as the Lord has spoken to that nation which will not serve the king of Babylon? So do not listen to the words of the prophets who speak to you, saying, you will not serve the king of Babylon, for they prophesy a lie to you. For I have not sent them, declares the Lord, but they prophesy falsely in my name, in order that I may drive you out, that you may perish, you and the prophets who prophesy to you. Then I spoke to the priests and to all this people, saying, thus says the Lord, do not listen to the words of your prophets who prophesy to you, saying, behold, the vessels of the Lord's house will now shortly be brought again from Babylon. For they are prophesying a lie to you. Do not listen to them. Serve the king of Babylon and live. Why should this city become a ruin? Do you get the vibe here that he doesn't want them listening to these prophets who prophesy that they're not going to suffer? Do you get that vibe? I feel like I repeated myself so many times. Yeah, I was actually, in the middle of reading this, I was thinking, wait a minute, did I copy and paste the wrong verses over there again? Because I feel like I'm reading the exact same thing. I didn't copy and paste the wrong verses, but I am reading the exact same thing. He's making the point over and over again. I spoke all these words to Zedekiah, bring your necks, your is plural. That's in the top up there in verse 12. Your necks is plural. So he's not just talking to Zedekiah, he's probably talking to the other royal officials, princes, advisors, people around him in his court. All of you submit your necks to this king. In verse 14 and 15, again, the prophets probably didn't know that they were trying to trick the people out of their land. May not have been aware of that. Maybe it's just spiritual warfare at play, but the end result of what they're doing is exactly that. They're trying to trick them. They're going to cause them to get kicked out and suffer. In verse 16 and 17, we are not sure when it says that, if this is something that happened at the exact same time or if it's something that maybe took place just a little bit later. It's interesting that he calls them your prophets, though. He calls them your prophets. It's not like... It's not like, oh, a true prophet of God. No. Your prophets. Has there ever been a situation where there were prophets, besides here, where there are prophets that were clearly prophets for the purpose of supporting someone's point of view or someone's ego? Has there been their prophets and then the prophets of God? Can you think of any instances?
I was reading my daily study.
Yeah.
Micah and the one, where he had that priest stay with him.
Oh, okay. Yes, he had his own priest.
Yeah.
Because that'll bless him to have his own priest, right? And then they come along and say, hey, leave him and serve a whole tribe. And so using the priest as a good luck charm, basically. Good one, yeah.
The prophets of Baal versus...
Prophets of
The
Baal, there's a
prophet
good
of-
one. There's a good one. All right. Prophets versus prophet. Elijah versus, which one is the true prophet of God? They get them up there. I was thinking, too, along those same lines, was it when Jehoshaphat visits Ahab and says, hey, let's see if we're going to be successful in battle. You have any prophets? Oh, do we have prophets? We got prophets, all right. Come on over. And they're doing this weird dance or something, and they say, oh, the Lord says you will be successful. And what was Jehoshaphat's response to that? Did he say, oh, that's great.
Don't you have a prophet of the Lord?
Don't you got a real prophet here? Even he's like, I know the difference. This is not, it's sort of like you walked into the wrong church building. You're like, this is not the church I was looking for. This is not the kind of prophet I was looking for, right? And then he said, don't you have a real prophet? And what did Ahab say about the real prophet of God? Micaiah was his name.
He never tells me what I want to hear.
Yeah, oh, there is one, but I hate that guy. He never says what I want to hear.
Tells me what I want to hear.
Oh, man. And then you look at the exchange between those two and you see, again, what is... the sarcasm in that passage is just... It's a fun read, I think. It's fun to read that, just to see. He mocks the other prophets of Baal by, when Ahab asks, will we be successful? And he says, oh, yes, you'll be successful. And then Ahab's first response is, yeah, right. Tell me the truth. How many times I have to tell you, stop lying to me, tell me the truth. He knew he was just making fun of him and his prophets, and he always wants to hear what he wants to hear kind of a thing. And he said, well, you're going to die, actually. And he goes from there.
He
So,
gets Jehoshaphat to dress up like a king, and he dresses up like a common soldier.
Yeah,
I don't
just
know
to-
why Jehoshaphat goes along with that.
yeah, I guess that doesn't speak well of him, does it? But that whole exchange, right? There are other prophets. Just because someone is an elder or a preacher or whatever, sorry, that's not necessarily enough. It doesn't mean they are one from God or really working for God. They could be yours. These may well, in fact, be prophets that they voted for. This could be prophets by popular vote. Don't really know. But to say your prophets is to kind of hint at the idea that, hey, God's not saying my prophets, your prophets, the ones that you've chosen. Which this, it gives me a little bit of a pause to think about, because the first time I had ever even heard of the concept of elders, well, let me say it differently. When I was growing up and I knew about elders in church, and I was taught from a young age, churches are always supposed to have a plurality of elders. That's the way God set it up. But I always assumed that God said you're supposed to vote. The congregation votes on your elders. I just assumed that until somebody brought up, well, where is that in the Bible? And I've not found it. I haven't seen it there. I've seen examples of an evangelist appointing elders, and that's really about the only example. Either an evangelist or an apostle or someone appoints them.
Like Paul.
Yeah, definitely. But beyond that, you don't see the whole, at least I haven't seen the whole popular vote thing. So why is it standard practice, it seems like in almost every church, to have a popular vote? Which you guys, you should know this, but we do take a vote here, but it's a vote of affirmation. It's not a vote of declaration or whatever. It's not a vote to say, oh, he made the cut as an elder, he got a good vote, he didn't. No, it's the elders are appointed before that by the evangelist, but we take the vote because we want to make sure we didn't miss something, right? We're not inspired. We don't want to appoint someone that's not qualified and that people really do not respect. So we take that vote so that we can see, do we affirm this choice? Is it a good choice or not? Anyway, this is just an excuse to talk about it. It's just a reminder. Sometimes my own opinion is the church in general, and I want to be careful what I say because, talk to these guys over here with more intelligence on this, on the, much more life experience in the church. As I look out, I see a lot of churches that have suffered, not grown like they should, probably for various reasons, and they've done things a certain way, and one of the things they've suffered might be a weak eldership, or an eldership that just doesn't really run the church maybe the way that biblical eldership should. A lot of times they're focused on other things rather than scripture sometimes. I see that, and then I see the response of certain big churches sometimes. Oftentimes I note it in like a Baptist church or something like that, where they basically don't have an eldership. They basically have they may have figureheads there, but they've basically pushed that aside, and you got one man running the show, the pastor, the elder, the preacher, the guy, and he spearheads that congregation. Well, what happens? A lot of these congregations really explode, and they do really well for a season. But what happens when the one guy falls? When the one guy falls, everything spirals out of control. Everything seems to fall. Sometimes there are problems, and I'm not sure. I suspect people looked at the one and say, look, you tried to get good people, to be elders, but look how stifling they are. Look how they're failing at their job. We need to be bold. We need to press on. We need to stop wasting time on red tape. So we get one person with a bold vision. He takes us ahead, and then he falls and he crumbles, and you still have a problem. Kind of makes sense to me that when we look at Scripture, God really didn't ordain either one, from what I can tell. He did not ordain the one pastor. I don't see that example. And he didn't ordain, or from what I can tell, he didn't set aside the congregation popularity vote eldership either. He had the apostles or the evangelists appointing elders. The right kind of people, hopefully, so the two will keep each other in check. So when this guy starts going out of whack, you've got a group of hopefully really well disciplined, spiritually minded men who will say, whoa, that is not godly, that is not biblical. But at the same time, you don't just have people who are just popular among the members, however mature or immature they might be. You have people who are hopefully really godly men, who someone who invested a lot of time knowing that would be aware of that. So you have a really neat checks and balance system. And there again, it's just a little way where I just think, hey, a lot of mankind's trouble that we've gotten ourselves into might have been avoided if we were just a little bit more careful to do it the biblical way, or try to follow the Bible's example. So that's way too much to be said under this guise of your prophets. So certainly not saying that Jeremiah is saying all that. Just a side comment there. So the golden vessels that he talks about, these vessels, were taken away in about 604, and then again more taken away in 597 BC by Babylon. So for anyone to say that these vessels will be brought back, behold, the vessels of the house of the Lord, ooh, the priests are going to eat that up. They're going to love that. They've been missing these things. So to see that is also going to be very enticing to them, because these things were being and were going to be taken away. More will be said on that too. Lots coming. But if they are prophets, and if the word of the Lord is with them, let them now entreat the Lord of hosts that the vessels which are left in the house of the Lord, in the house of the king of Judah, and in Jerusalem may not go to Babylon. For thus says the Lord of hosts, concerning the pillars, concerning the sea, concerning the stands, and the rest of the vessels that are left in this city, which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, did not take when he carried into exile Jeconiah, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, from Jerusalem to Babylon, and all the nobles of Judah and Jerusalem. Yes, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, concerning the vessels that are left in the house of the Lord and in the house of the king of Judah and in Jerusalem. They will be carried to Babylon. They will be there until the day I visit them, declares the Lord. Then I will bring them back and restore them to this place. So, Jeremiah wants to give. He says, you want definitive proof that I'm a prophet of God? Well, here it is. Look at what's going to happen. Some of those vessels, 604, they were already taken away into to Babylon, along with Jeconiah, which, by the way, who was Jeconiah? What's another name for that man?
Jehoiachin.
Yes, Jehoiachin, the son of Josiah that only reigned for a short period of 3 months before Nebuchadnezzar swooped in and took him away. And a lot of people seem to be thinking, we want this guy back. He's a legitimate king. He should make it back. And he wasn't. So he said, hey, some of those things have been taken away, but there's more. There's more that they did not take. And those are going to be taken away too. So mark my words, this day is coming when more will be taken away. So you can clearly see, am I telling the truth as a prophet of God should or not? He gives them a nice objective test, definitive proof that they can look to. Verse 22 reminds us, though, they won't be there forever. When they're carried away to Babylon, they will be there until the day God visits. That's a fun study, by the way, the visitation of the Lord. It's way more exciting than visiting the sick when God comes to visit. I'm telling you. Because when it happens, you never know if it's going to be good or bad. When you see that word used, it's used either way. And sometimes it's a both and. When God shows up, good things often happen to the people who need good things coming, and very bad things often happen to the people with whom bad was due to come. It's that if you want to think about scales in that day, the visitation might, the day God visits is probably an okay way of looking at that. It's the idea of God's showing up and we're going to make things right. We're going to clean house. You and I as little kids have been playing in our rooms. We've been making a mess. And we're not making our beds because nobody's here to stop us. We do what we want to do. And then the door opens up. And what happens? It's the visitation. And we know right off the bat if this is going to be a nice visit or if this is going to be a bad visit. We know. That's the way it is with God. When he steps in, everyone knows, all that stuff that we've been getting away with and that we've rationalized, even our rationale goes out the window and we realize, I'm exposed. God's going to deal with it. How is God going to deal with Babylon? You remember who he's going to use to visit Babylon, to visit all those exiles who've been trapped there 70 years, and to get them back? He names them.
Sorry?
Yes, Cyrus the Persian, named long before Jeremiah. In the book of Isaiah, he's going to use Cyrus to do that. So God's going to visit. Fun study. I want to say, I'm going to pause on that though. Let's go to these other items that we talked about in the 18th verse there. That, yeah, he took a lot of gold and things away, but Nebuchadnezzar left a few things behind. And these things are going to be gone. You know what Jeremiah is talking about? He mentions them. He talks about the, he says the vessels left, and where does he mention them? Does he say the sea?
19.
Thank you. The rest of the vessels left in the sea. The pillars, the sea, and the stands. Let's look at what we're talking about here. This is what we're talking about. These pillars were very gargantuous, very massive pillars. They had their own names. The name Jachin and Boaz were the nicknames for these pillars, which means establish, it means strength. They were said to have an 18-foot circumference, so 18 feet around these pillars. This is probably not perfectly to scale. I tried to put a person's height there so you can get a flavor of how big these things were. So when he's talking about, he left some things behind, Nebuchadnezzar's not coming back to lift up the rug and sweep the gold dust that got missed in his first run. No. He's coming back because, oh, I forgot the load-bearing beams in your house. And he's going to rip those out. These massive things were overlaid with brass, so you got this massive gold. And I mean, you talk about a serious scrapper. I mean, guys looking for scrap metal will do some amazing things. But an 18-foot circumference beam, I would challenge them. A guy on the worst of drugs. I just don't know that he's going to pull that one off. But Nebuchadnezzar, on the other hand, now look at this sea. This is what priests would come and they would wash it ceremonially. 45-foot circumference. Massive basin. Huge. On top of these massive. And then there were these portable wash basins spread throughout, and that's what those arrows are. Those are the things that are left. So all the small instruments and items and stuff already been carried away, but Jeremiah is not just giving a small little prediction of like, well, he might take this. He will come and he will take more. Not a Nostradamus type prophecy, you know what I mean? He's giving a specific one. He's like, I'll tell you exactly what it'll take. It's akin to me saying, okay, someone's going to come, a thief is going to come, he's going to steal the steeple, then he's going to take, I don't know, all the chairs and all the doors, and then he'll come back and he'll remove what? Oh, all the books from the office, and the chairs, and the copier, and the lintels of every window. It's just, this is not some small task. This is a very big, obvious sign. He's making it clear, listen, you'll know if I was speaking the truth because he's going to come take these. So you can imagine, look how glorious that would be to stand and to see this huge structure built by the work of David and Solomon. Money of David and the money and laborers of Solomon, and to see all of that going away. So this is no small prophecy, big deal. Any questions from this chapter before we jump into the exciting chapter 28? Chapter 28 has got to be one of the most fun, for me anyway, one of the most fun chapters to read in this whole book. Because especially I do audio Bible a lot, I like to listen to it. And a lot of Jeremiah, when you're listening to it, especially in 1 or 2 days or a quick go, it can get really repetitive. But then when you get to this chapter, you see it come to life in a very big way. That's like, whoa, this is impressive. All that message, all that stuff that Jeremiah was saying in chapter 27 about the yoke and what it means, and don't listen to any other prophet who says otherwise, all of that is going to come to a culmination just a few months later here in chapter 28, where a bold-faced prophet steps up against Jeremiah to speak the exact words, boldly the exact words that he said no one should speak. He's going to come in and he's going to prophesy against what Jeremiah had been prophesying about. So it's really, really impressive. Probably, we don't know exactly how long it was, but anywhere from 1 to 4 months is probably a good guess as to when chapter 28 takes place after chapter 27. So at most 4 months later, Jeremiah is probably still coming to the temple area, still wearing his yoke like God had instructed him to do, as he had been giving this message about put the yoke on. That's what God says to do, the yoke of Babylon. But he encounters a false prophet, and this false prophet's name is Hananiah. Hananiah. So, now in the same year, in the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah, in the 4th year, in the 5th month, Hananiah, son of Azur, prophet who was from Gibeon, spoke to me in the house of the Lord, in the presence of the priests and all the people, saying. So, Hananiah, he is from this place of Gibeah. He is from Gibeon. He is from Gibeon. His name means Yahweh has been gracious. You're going to read that name again in Jeremiah in chapter 36, verse 12, and chapter 37, verse 13. 2 other Hananiahs are mentioned in this book. Okay, so he's not the only one in the Bible. But here, he's the one that steps up. And I would like to suggest to you that he is the proverbial equal opposite, the nemesis of Jeremiah. He is the one who steps forward, also a prophet, clearly bold, clearly fearless. And he comes from this town of Gibeon, which actually is also a priestly town too. Just like Jeremiah came from Anathoth. Some people think that this guy Hananiah was also a priest as well as a prophet. Don't know, but it's probably a guess because of his town. Now, I warned you about this. What do we know about the Gibeonites in Gibeon? Where do we read about that in Scripture first?
I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. We just went over some Joshua studies in the young adult group. And so in Joshua chapter 9, I think, we read about this group of people from Gibeon, these Gibeonites. So first, we see some enemies of God that are inside of the walls of Jericho. And that's the whole situation with Rahab. And then we see, then they get chased out of, or then is Achan next? And then they get chased out of Ai by the enemies of God. And then and then we come to the 9th chapter, and right after they get chased out of Ai, this group, so these kings, they're trying to take over the land God's promised them, and the kings start to rally together to go against God's people. So these kings that are sovereign in and of themselves are now banding together to go against God's people. And so that's kind of a big deal. And so, but then there's this one group of these people out there that have heard about the things that God has done, and they try to go, they're scared for their lives, so they get this big elaborate plan together to save their lives because they know that God's for real. So they...
Okay, that's the Gibeonites. So what do these Gibeonites do?
Right, they put on these old looking sandals, and they get this old nasty bread and, you know, old leather. I mean, like, their whole outfit and their whole getup looked like...
wineskins too, yeah.
Yeah, wineskins, right. And made it look as if they were out wandering for a long time, and that they're from a distant land, and that they weren't a part of the people that Joshua was trying to kill, that they were told by God to kill. And so they come up to Joshua and they're like, look, we're from this distant land, and we're your servants, and we need help. We don't have any more food or anything. And they're like, so Joshua's like, well, I don't know, where are you guys really from? And he never consults God about it. And
Yeah, they keep saying, we're just from a faraway country. We heard of the fame of the Lord your God.
right, and they're like,
Your
look at all
God's so
this stuff.
famous, we traveled all the way over here to have a treaty with you.
And then, so they're like, all right, fine, we'll make a covenant with you. We won't kill you, but you guys have to, oh yeah, we won't kill you. You guys can live with us, basically.
Yeah, but then what happens?
So they were
Skip to the end, what do
convinced.
they find out?
Then they found out 3 days later, after these Gibeonites were in their camp, they find out that they really are from the area that they were supposed to take over. And
They were locals, they were Canaanites in the Promised Land, exactly. Thank you, yeah. They were the locals who were supposed to be driven out, and unfortunately Joshua and the people naively made a peace treaty with them without consulting God at the tent of meeting first. And they thought, well, they seem to be pretty far away from here. That treaty ended up being a big mistake, and they thought, well, they tried to clean it up by saying, we'll make slaves out of them. We'll make slaves out of these Gibeonites, and they'll do work for us. It'll be great. Well, it seemed pretty good. It was probably a nice cover-up plan. But did it work out really well? Did it? No, not necessarily. Sorry, I'll let him finish. But, yeah, so when you get to the Gibeonites there, they find out later, oh, by the way, help. You had a treaty with us, and we're being oppressed now. So now God's people have to go rescue them. They have to fight battles that they would not have otherwise had to fight. So Gibeon's got quite a history. They deceived Joshua and the Israelites. They pretended to be far away. Joshua had to fight a battle to rescue them. Later on in history, Saul would attack them. And that would also bring guilt because he violated the very treaty that they had. And so David comes along later, and there's this problem because of what Saul did. And so David said, fine, you can take out your revenge on Saul's descendants then. And so there was that bloody situation that took place around Saul and David's time. Then for a short period of time, the tabernacle was actually moved. There was a high place in Gibeon. The tabernacle was moved there. And so you would have some priests and some people hanging out there at that particular time. Let's see, it was there for a short time, and that was during the time that David and Solomon, they were of their time. It was a priestly town. And then we have here, what we're looking at here, a false prophet comes from that same region. By the way, a little side note here, not only is there, a lot of mixed stuff. If you look at Gibeon, a side study of Gibeon, you've got a situation where God's people just messed up. They should have consulted God, and they didn't. And because of that, they ended up with this group of people. But they tried to turn it into we'll help God out. We'll make God pull a Romans 8:28 for us. We're going to make these men into our slaves who will carry our stuff for us now. And they'll be our workers. And for a time, it looked like they probably had a sweet deal. We've got these people who are doing the heavy lifting for us now. So thank you, God, for working that one out for us. Until those people are saying, hey, we're under threat. They're going to hurt us. And you made a treaty with us. They said, we did. We made it. We gave our oath. Okay, fine. Now we got to go to battle for these people that we should have eliminated. And they went to battle for them. Then you fast forward throughout history, and then we come up to this time today where we're dealing with a notorious false prophet who's also originating from that area. And that area has become spiritualized again because the tabernacle was in it for a while. So there again, you can just see the efforts we're going to clean this place up. We're going to make a good thing out of a bad situation, and it's all going to work out. But time and time again, you've got problems that come from this city as well. And Hananiah is another one. It just reminds me of any time you and I think we can just make it work. God, yes, he said certain things, and for whatever reason, we didn't obey him, so that's all right. We'll clean it up. We'll make it work out, smooth it out. And we think we have a plan. Even the best plans that we come up with, there are going to be problems. George Flaw pointed this one out in his Eternal Struggle series. I really appreciated this little side comment. When the Israelites came out of Egypt, and they came up to Kadesh Barnea, and they were going to go fight, take over the Promised Land the first time, but then they saw those giants big and tall, and they just got scared to death, and 10 out of the 12 spies said, there's just no way. They were scared to death to fight, right? They didn't want to fight. So what ended up happening? Remember 40 years of wandering in the wilderness? Do you know how much they fought in the wilderness? George Fall counted about 60 battles that they fought. 60 different battles they had to fight. Why? Because they were afraid to fight. They were afraid to fight the way God told them to initially, and so then they had to fight 60 probably completely unnecessary battles just to get right back to where they started from.
Well, and that, of course, was one of the ways God took care of the generation, because he told them that none of them were going to enter.
Yeah.
And so that it wasn't just through natural things, it was also battles, death through that. So every one of them did die in the
Yeah.
wilderness.
Everyone that was supposed to, yeah, that's true.
But you know, the interesting thing is, you talk about Gideon, and it's like this one mistake of not consulting God, ramifications go
Throughout Scripture, yes.
the history.
We're so many
Israel
hundreds of years
after.
later,
Mhm.
and we're looking at another guy that came from that area, and you just wonder, would this guy have been here?
And the,
If that decision
and the
would
thing
be
that
different.
reminds me of is the other mistake made by Abraham. That even worse, because they're still dealing with the problem of
Yeah.
Ishmael's descendants, if
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken.
That's true. Yeah, or at least supposedly they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. Man, wonderful points. Every time we think we have a good idea, we're reminded that we're not God and that God is. And there are reasons that sometimes we just never would have thought of, just never would have conceived. But I love that reminder. What battles are you and I fighting today? And then we should ask the question, are those battles that we are fighting that we just brought on ourselves because we failed to fight one that we should have fought? We let something go, and now we're fighting a bunch of other things. Happens a lot, right? Any other comments about this? Next week we'll get into more of this particular battle, because this has got to be one of my favorite chapters in the book, just because it's just exciting. It really is. So let's go ahead and pray. God, thank you for being the one who does fight for us. Thank you for adopting us into your family. Thank you for the fact that we can know that we win ahead of time because of you on our side. It's such a wonderful thing. And God, it's such a sad thing at the same time when we knowingly neglect you and we decide to step away from what you've put right in front of us, all the good things that you've given to us, because we think we see another way or we see another option or opportunity, and it ends up not being that at all. God, please help us to not get angry at you for the things that we've brought upon ourselves that you've tried to prevent us having to go through. Help us to learn from all the hard things that we do have to go through, even if they were things that we brought on ourselves. Help us to learn from them and to be able to help others to learn too, so that maybe less people will have to go through some of this same stuff. But at the end of the day, God, thank you for being King. Thank you for never losing. Thank you for always being faithful. Thank you for the mission that you've put us on earth for. Help us to give it our best. And thank you for the promises that you give to us to get us through the hard things in life. Thank you also so much for your Spirit indwelling us to help us be the people that you want us to be and to draw closer to you. Please help us not to quench him, but help us to really work with him, to pay attention to what your word is saying and listen to it. Let it take root in our lives. And I ask this in your son's name.
Amen.
Teach me to scroll through the Bible.